It's no secret, and I've said it time and time again, we are in somewhat of a trading card game renaissance, but a few things have come up recently that have called into question whether or not that renaissance is truly lasting or if the TCG bubble is about to burst. So it's a fair question to ask, and it's one we're going to answer today. Is the trading card game bubble bursting in front of our very eyes? To understand this, we need to go all the way back to 2019 at the very genesis of this new era of trading card games. 2019 and 2020 saw the release of two upstart trading card games that went about things very differently. The first in 2019 was Flesh and Blood, an indie trading card game made by relative unknown players in the space with a dark fantasy aesthetic aimed to capture that classic competitive trading card game audience. And Flesh and Blood struck at a time where Magic the Gathering, the competitive mainstay of the trading card game space, was stepping away from competitive organized play systems. This allowed it to grab onto a portion of that player base and maintain a steady growth until today. This truly was the first game in a long while that proved that trading card games could indeed rise and maintain popularity in a space that had become increasingly more restricted. If you weren't one of the top 3 trading card games, you were oftentimes viewed as doomed to die in several sets or 2 years. But it wasn't the only game that came around at that time and proved that there was more to the trading card game space than people were giving credit to. Because about 10 months later, a new game entered the market via Kickstarter called MetaZoo. And unlike competitive play, this was targeted specifically at the collector sphere. The vibes were all old school Pokemon. If you lived in the 90s and the early 2000s and you collected Pokemon cards, this had that same nostalgic feel, and it was very much leaning on that as a selling point. Both of these games struck at a time where people were cooped up at home and looking to distract themselves or engage in a new hobby. And this, coupled with the immediate and increased rabid popularity of opening and collecting expensive Pokemon cards, led to a massive boom in the trading card game space. These two games proved that it was possible to create a new trading card game and to make some serious impact. They went about it in two very different ways. On one hand, Flesh and Blood raised seed money from investors that knew and believed in the project, and then got distribution across the world, starting small and then expanding from there. And then you had MetaZoo, who had a massive fundraising effort over on Kickstarter, and then of course went through distribution from that point. The success that both of these games showed proved that it could be done in a variety of different ways, and companies started to take notice. From that point, we got a bunch of different games. We got things like Grand Archive in the anime TCG space. We got games from Bandai Namco like One Piece, which was and continues to be a massive success. We got Lorcana from Ravensburger, focusing and honing in on the Disney IP. We got Sorcery over on Kickstarter. We got the Gundam TCG. We got Union Arena. We got a re-release of the Universes fighting system. We got a superhero trading card game called Alpha Clash. We got Star Wars Unlimited. I mean, we could go on and on. And every time a new trading card game was announced and then released, the audience in the trading card game space sort of quietly asked that question that no one really wanted to bring up. Is this all just another bubble? Because we've seen TCG bubbles before. If you go way back in TCG history, this exact sort of thing happened before, and at a certain point, the market became too saturated. The audience in the space couldn't consume all of the supply, essentially, from all of these trading cards, and game studio and card game after card game started to fold. The house of cards fell down. And is that something that's going to happen? That was the question that was asked every single time one of these new trading card games was announced. And some of us thought maybe that's what we're seeing when MetaZoo finally announced they were shutting their doors after steady decline and lack of interest. But no, in fact, that's when we got even more games, and some of the most popular ones hit the store shelves after that moment. And so the bubble didn't burst then, it only continued to grow. But another TCG has announced that it is closing its doors. Altered TCG made a recent announcement that they are no longer going to be producing their game, and it again calls into question whether or not this whole thing is a bubble that is going to eventually burst. Or is this that we're about to look at an indicator of something else that went wrong? For those that don't know, Altered TCG was the most backed TCG, the most funded TCG on Kickstarter of all time. Up until recently, I will say that, up until recently, this was the most funded Kickstarter of all time. It beat out, at the time, Sorcery Contested Realm, a game I was quite fond of and very excited about. I backed both of these, by the way. I did indeed back Altered alongside of Sorcery Contested Realm. Sorcery still continuing on. Altered TCG, this was a game that had a lot riding on it. It had a lot of promises that it made in this Kickstarter space, and it was, I would say, wholly unique from the ground up on how it presented engaging with it, how it presented its own mechanics, and how you, as the owner of these pieces, these game pieces, engaged with the game pieces themselves. And there were a lot of really exciting things that went along with this game. But recently, this post was made as they went back to GameFound this time, not Kickstarter, to try and raise money for their most recent, their upcoming set, Roots of Corruption. It did not hit its goals. It left them quite short, as they can see right here. And they announced that not only would they not be releasing Roots of Corruption, but they also were shuttering the game experience itself, that Altered would no longer be in production. And again, it begs the question, is this indicative of the market itself for TCGs changing? Are we going to be seeing a constriction, a restriction of the space itself and the players within it? I don't think we're watching the TCG space start to burst and constrict. I think that this wholly is an issue from Altered's perspective. This was a game, like I said, that made a lot of promises. This was a decentralized platform wherein you owned essentially tokens in the cloud server that was maintained by the company itself, and you could have them print and send you your deck or any number of cards whenever you wanted. That is a hugely ambitious system, and I would imagine it took a lot to run that back end. They also were looking to produce their own online client to play this game through their website. These are things, by the way, that they actually did. You could actually, to some degree, engage with both of these, including but not limited to the online client. The problem that I see, though, is that these things probably cost massive amounts of money to maintain and actually iterate on. And because of that, if you don't have a consistent buy-in from a very large player base that is growing, then you're not necessarily going to be able to sustain this for long. And I think that is where we sat with Altered TCG. And of course, the natural next question is, are we reaching a saturation point, a point where in this TCG hobby, the bubble is eventually going to burst because there's just not enough players to meet the demand that is provided by all of these games, and eventually they all just start to fold one by one? And it's hard to argue that that's going to happen when we have yet another massive Kickstarter success. This time, the official Cyberpunk trading card game has over doubled the amount that Altered TCG made to become the highest grossing, if you even want to call it that, the biggest backed TCG on Kickstarter of all time. And again, we have one of these massive IPs that is pulling players, and maybe even not players, but just people that like the IP, into this brand new hobby. And it's for that reason that I'm almost hard pressed to say we're not necessarily going to see a well and true bubble burst in the trading card game space, simply because we have games like this, games like Riftbound, games like Lorcana, games like One Piece that are pulling in massive amounts of audience members to engage in a new hobby, in a new way with the intellectual property that they've fallen in love with and want to engage with. Because of games like Cyberpunk TCG, which I am going to make a video about later this week, I'm quite excited about it. I'm going to be backing this game as I did with both Sorcery and Altered and so on and so forth. I am just blown away by the fact that these games and these intellectual properties are just rapidly and massively expanding the player base to a point where even if one of these games fails or just chooses to be done, like if Lorcana says, cool, we've done what we needed to do or what we wanted to do, we'll be done, there will be players that leave the trading card game space, but I feel as though just as many of those players, because they've fallen in love with a trading card game as a hobby, may just move into a different game, find another game that makes them feel that like excitement or, the chase, the rush of opening packs or engaging with the game mechanics themselves. Because this space is growing so rapidly, we may actually never see that true bubble burst moment that so many, myself included, perhaps feared would one day come to the trading card game hobby. Is it going to happen? I can't know for sure, but it's hard for me to look at some of these big success stories like your One Pieces, and obviously in this case, your Cyberpunk TCGs, and actually expect all of it to come crashing down. But then again, crazier things have happened. If you enjoy this type of content and you want to see more editorial style videos like this about trading card games, please let me know that in a comment below. And of course, make the number go to the other number, because that's what we do here on the channel. We sail the high seas of TCGs. As always, everybody, thanks for watching.